Hello, and welcome back. Thanks for joining me once again. Now, I'm not here to talk to fans of certain technologies today. We're not talking to Spark fans. We're not talking to Microsofties. We're not doing any of that. Instead, I have opinions I want to share. And I want to do a few of these on certain hot topic items where we're hearing so much buzz. We're hearing differences of opinions. We're hearing various different people pushing various different bits of hype. And I just want to share where I stand on it. Now, traditionally, I've avoided doing this, right? If I'm not an expert in something, I don't want to necessarily share my opinion because there's people far better placed to talk about it. That's why you don't hear me talking about Snowflake and some of the other technologies and like SageMaker over at Amazon. I'm not an expert in those things. Therefore, I'm happy to let other people have their opinions. However, when we talk about data architectures and the data landscape and people in the industry, I've got opinions. So today, I want to talk about the biggie. We're gonna get it off my chest. We're gonna talk about data mesh. Now, data mesh has been exploding in the industry. It's massively ramping up on the hype curve. Although, check out Gartner, and it's got a little X saying it doesn't think it's going to be around for very long. And why is that? Why is literally every single vendor pushing data mesh currently? Why, if you speak to anybody, are they saying, oh no, you should be looking at a data mesh right now? Why is every single conference full of various different sessions saying this is how you go away and build a data mesh? And I don't know why, but I do have my opinions about is it right? And that's one of the questions I get a ton from various different people going, should I build a data mesh? Should I be doing that? Oh, I've just heard data mesh is the new thing. Should I throw away everything I'm doing and start investing in a mesh? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. No is essentially the answer for the majority of clients. So let's wind it back a little bit. Let's kind of just jump in, have a bit of an explanation as to what we're talking about, and just get on the same page first. So I'm going to dive over here. So Samek did lots and lots and lots of talking. There's a book out. You can go read into the details, and it's a really, really good concept. And I mean, the way it's fairly simply described here, we've got that, the whole way of things currently work. You've got lots of different operational data sources. There's a centralized pipeline managed by a centralized team of data engineers that does some data wrangling, gets things in the right place, and then there's some analytics that happens at the end. That's the thing that we all know and love. And that data pipeline middle bit could be a traditional warehouse. It could be a data lake. It could be a modern data warehouse. There's so many different architectural patterns that fit into that middle bit. The argument being that's hard and complex and tricky to maintain and divorces people from responsibility for their own data. And everything is going towards this idea of data products. So data mesh is pushing to say, well, the people making the data should actually be responsible for treating it like the valid outcome of their work. So saying I've built a service that manages, in this case, a lot of the book is framed around kind of a music providing bit of software. So you can do artists, podcast users, the playlists to put together, all those different objects in a software design piece of view are a microservice, each of which has its own data, each of which can be publishing this nice, cleansed, curated data set ready for consumption by anyone else. So it's not this idea, I've got my operational data, I've got my analytical data, and they have to have this mad bit of translation in the middle. It's about the idea of saying, well, actually, anyone producing data should be so proud of it that they stand it up as their own product. Tested, cleansed, quality guaranteed, produced as if it was a bit of software. Which is great. Great. If you're the right kind of company. So this is being pushed. And now everyone is setting out going, great, data as a product. Don't need data engineers anymore. I've now got data product owners. Don't need to have a central team. I've got a federated team because everyone is now a data product owner producing their own bit of data. Now, this is a concept for an organization is phenomenal. It's a fantastic idea to say that kind of distributed domain ownership, that idea that everyone in the organization who is producing data, every team who stands up a microservice as part of a distributed architecture, that microservice is producing and curating its own data set, and they should provide that data product out to the rest of the business. So then you have this whole mix of people actually producing these different elements of data, these data products, and then stitching it together. So we think about what that actually looks like. You know, we're sitting here saying, well, I've got all these different analytical data sets, well, not operational data sets, sorry. And that might be various different facets of the main application that I'm selling. And then rather than it going through the central pipeline and then producing some data marts on the back of it, I'm not doing that. That doesn't make sense. We don't do that anymore. Instead, we're going to say, well, I'm going to produce an analytical product that's stitching together these 3 bits. And then a different team entirely can stitch together a different one. Maybe that's used to go into something else. And it's this whole free sharing of information and the fact you can trust each one of these individual data sets, because each one of these things has been produced with the care and attention and the discipline of any kind of software product. That is the dream. That is the ideal that data mesh is going for. Now, there's a load of things that underpin it, and a load of things that people are talking about going, how do we actually get to that point? And most of it is people jumped on the technology bandwagon. So we see all sorts of people going, I am your data mesh data platform. I'm going to teach all of your engineers how to be a data mesh team instead. And that just doesn't work, honestly, to be very, very frank. Most of this is an organizational cultural change. It's the idea of saying, well, actually, how do we get this data ownership? How do we get the people actually producing this data to have that level of ownership and responsibility and accountability for the data they're producing? And reorganizing and restructuring your company around that goal is not something most companies are anywhere near. And there's a few things in terms of why this is so hard to do. Forget technology for now. Forget the tech stack. Forget whether you want to do it via virtualization or Spark or a generic data platform or buying another mesh specialist tool. Forget all of that. Are the people in your organization who are producing data, are they going to be able to do this? One, are they tech savvy enough? And that's one of my criticisms in terms of the data mesh principles. If we read through the book, there has this idea of these technology generalists. So it's not just pure app dev. It's not just pure data people. I'm not saying any of these different pigeonholed things. Saying any software developer who's producing a bit of software should be managing and producing that bit of data. And that is a struggle for me. One, it assumes that you are a technology company. It assumes that the people in your company that are producing data are techies. They're tech savvy. And they have the skills and abilities and tools to be able to do that. And actually also the time to be able to manage it. It also assumes that your data is produced in terms of some kind of managed application. Your data comes from somewhere that can be produced as an API. Now, I mean, I've been around the block a fair bit. I'm not sure I can name a single company that I've ever worked with that doesn't have data held in some kind of non-modern software stack. You know, you have data that's coming in CSVs and Excel sheets and held in some ancient Access database that's propped up on someone's data on a laptop somewhere. You have data held in SharePoint, in SaaS products. You've got coming from shared Salesforce, various different things. It's really nice to talk about a data mesh as this concept when you're breaking apart the microservices in a well-built distributed application. And we draw a ring around it and say, yeah, okay, maybe the data product's coming from that one application that is built internally, that's managed internally by a modern dev team who understands microservices and distributed technologies. But then when you talk about all the data products that sit outside of that, all the things managed by finance and HR and other products, all the things that are sat on someone's laptops as spreadsheets and just the myriad sources of data that people have, trying to say everyone who ever owns a bit of data should actually be then standing it up as an API and exposing it without having to go through some other tool, it's fairly naive in my estimation. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a criticism of the data mesh book itself and the data mesh theory, because it's trying to angle us towards this utopian future view going, this is the ideal we should be aiming for. We should be trying to move organizations to the point when that's how they think about data and that's how they think about producing data. The problem I currently have is people are skipping that step. People are forgetting the fact that your data lives in this vast, sprawling estate and you have data absolutely everywhere. And they're just going for the shiny. They're going for the hype. They're going to, oh yeah, no, I fancy a data mesh. Can you build a data mesh? Yeah, build a data mesh. And they're ignoring the cultural shift, the organizational shift, the technology foundation that needs to be in the entirety of the data producing community in order to get here. So essentially they're going, Well, we can just build these things on top of, I don't know, either a subset of data or some magic bit where the data's going to suddenly get exposed to us. And they're skipping the reality of it. And that's the problem. So nothing wrong with mesh itself. Mesh is a fantastic ideal, and companies should be moving in that direction. We should be starting to think about a couple of those key principles. The domain ownership of data, 100%, is actually something that should be built into how organizations are starting to think. I'm trying to say, if you're sending me some data and that's a spreadsheet you own, you are the data owner of that. The quality of it is yours. It also shouldn't be held in a spreadsheet if it's driving a load of analytics and stuff. But that's a different story. There's so much behind there, which is fantastic. The product team that owns an application that is churning out data should have responsibility for the quality, timeliness, accuracy of that data. And that's an idea that's been in data governance for years. Trying to give people proper accountability for the data they're producing is a fundamental step in building a good data culture. So 100%, that is a fantastic idea. Distributed federated tech, actually making it so you're not going through a monolithic central pipeline that then has to be changed and updated and managed centrally. Yeah, we can get away from it. Fantastic. Giving people different abilities, empowering people to do their own stitching together of all these different bits of data is a fantastic ideal to aim for. The reality is most organizations are not there yet, and they're not going to be there for several years, if that. Certainly, you talk to your biggest enterprise customers who've been around for decades, they are not in a place where they could just adopt a mesh by putting a bit of technology in. That's putting a sticky plaster over decades of organic growth. Dark data, gray applications, whatever you want to call it. There's data everywhere that unless you're just building a company from absolute ground up and you have the ability to build it in these controlled, managed data products, there's just a huge amount of work to reach this thing. Again, data mesh itself, fundamentally fantastic idea. Is it appropriate for every single organization to currently adopt data mesh? No. And the books go into that detail. They say this isn't appropriate. This is a hard ideal. This is a big stretch goal for many organizations, and there's loads of companies who are not there. And yet, we're still seeing it as a massive bit of hype and everyone wants to do it. It's the bandwagon that people need to jump on. And again, it's just one of those things, just look at it with a critical eye and go, is this right for me? Is this right for me now? Now, what we tend to do, so advancing analytics, if someone says, can you build us a mesh? We go, no, we can't build you a mesh because you're not there. You do not have the data maturity. You don't have the technology. You don't have the embedded tech skills within your organization that is producing data to take on that level of, I don't know, care, technology, sophistication, call it what you will. So we'll tend to have, again, this mix of organizational data sitting around. Some of it might be really easy to get hold of because it's exposed as an API. Some of it might be you could do a bit of tech debt work to expose it that way. Some of it is simply held in various different places that just isn't reasonable to try and expose in that mesh style way. And so, yeah, we go centralized analytical thing. You know me, I build lots of lakes and lake houses and all of that kind of thing. But that work of sucking it up into a place where it's easy to expose, where you're not enforcing the technology, you're not forcing your business owners who own that data to have to reach a certain level of tech sophistication, because in a lot of organizations, they're simply not going to. Their marketing teams aren't going to suddenly learn to be software developers so that they can stand up as a data product. It's just not going to happen. If we're talking about data coming just from an application, just from app devs, fine, makes sense. Do that, build it in, refactor your data, refactor your application to spit out data products. Great. But what about all of the other data in an organization? It's just not really realistic. So we tend to talk about frameworks. We tend to talk about metadata-driven things. We say make it really, 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 really easy to get data into this common platform upon which you can stand up an API. So you're having a team who are centralized, yes. You could do several federated ones. You could distribute this team if you needed to, but make it so easy to onboard this data that essentially that's not a huge bottleneck. There could be a team whose only job is to shovel data and do that connection going, okay, get that one, expose it via our centralized lakehouse. Get that one, expose it. Get that one, expose it. Every time a new bit of data comes, they just greedily run off, get it into their centralized piece. And then if you, at that point, you go, well, we don't want to then have a big centralized warehouse, a centralized data, a centralized way of managing this stuff. Well, you don't have to. At that point, you can build federated analytical products. You can have this kind of just this big layer of all of your different data with very little curation done to it, very little transformation. Essentially, all you've really done is put it into a place where you can stand that data up. And then loads of different teams, all the different places, can build their analytical products, and they can share their products. They can build things on top of it. If you build that common layer, you can shortcut that. Essentially, you're doing the standing up as a data product for the team because they don't necessarily have the tech skills. Now, that in itself, that's not a data mesh. That's a federated analytics architecture. And that kind of goes against a lot of the principles of data mesh itself. You see right at the start of those articles, like the data pipeline that sits in the middle is the enemy of this kind of federated, distributed utopia. But this kind of thing is the pragmatic approach that gives the analytical teams the flexibility that they want, that is reasonable for companies to adopt currently. Give it 5 years, give it 10 years, and maybe actually organizations will have made that massive cultural shift to actually get rid of that centralized platform and have a true mesh utopia. But currently, there are very few companies who have the technical skills in hand, that the breadth of their data can actually be ring-fenced to things that can be exposed in this way, that don't have a myriad of data platform or data sources held elsewhere in the organization. And that's why it's always disappointing if someone says, can you build me the latest and greatest of this thing? It's like, no, you don't need it. But it's the truth for the majority of people out there these days. The majority of organizations currently would love to have a mesh, but are not in a place where they could adopt a mesh architecture. And that's what I wanted to get off my chest. Oh, it feels nice getting that out in the open. We can all breathe easy. So, again, opinions. Data mesh, fantastic idea. It's an organizational and cultural shift as much as a technology one. Yes, you can make it easier by building out ways that various different data product owners can just plug their data into something and then have it exposed via an API to start building the mesh. But even that isn't quite there for the majority of organizations. And that's waiting for a technology sticky plaster to go over what is fundamentally a cultural shift. But is the idea of decentralizing and federating and allowing people, empowering people to build their own things, to dip into the treasure trove of organizational data and build out their own analytical products. Fantastic idea that has so much value. Does forcing the people who are producing data to take full responsibility for the data they produce, does that make any sense? Yes. That is absolutely a fundamental building block as to how you build a good data culture and how you build better data quality and make better decisions. All of these concepts none of them are new. They are all absolute great things to have in. They're all hard. They all take a lot of work and people and process and technology to actually get there. So should you build a mesh? Maybe. Depends. If your company's in the right state, if you are of the right nature. Should you be looking to build out federated analytics and enable people to do more with their data? Yeah, absolutely you should. But just, as always, be wary of the hype. And again, it's one of those things where if you're around long enough, you see these things come in waves. So for a long time, we were centralized. We had a single centralized data warehouse. And then the idea of self-serve analytics came along and boom, everyone was doing their own analytics. We decentralized everything. And then we realized that was chaos and everyone had different data, and the point that we first built data warehouses to have a single source of the truth, that had fallen apart because people had just gone and built their own things. And so we pulled it all back into the modern data warehouse platform, and we had a lake and a warehouse, and we're like, yes, this is nice and good. And then people started building out their own offshoots of things. And then we're like, oh, well, let's pull it back. Let's pull it into a lake. So we don't have people going off and building things from the lake and building from the warehouse and disagreeing with figures. We can do it all in the lake, so it's all accessible. We can do ML. We can fit various different use cases. And that made a lot of sense. And now this is a swing going back the other way, going, well, we centralized too much. Let's decentralize, because that's the next big thing. And in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, we'll centralize again because that's the way things keep going. In reality, find a compromise. Centralize where it makes sense from economies of scale and you're not building a bottleneck in. Decentralize where you can take advantage of domain ownership and each team is then empowered to do their own work. Build an architecture that actually does what you want it to do, and you'll generally be better off. Good. So anyway, that's just an opinion. There might be people who managed to build it and successfully transformed a large organization to actually build mesh principles in, and it's not as hard as I think. Maybe there's a magic button that you can press that will actually allow people to publish any kind of data in a reliable, robust way, and then all you need to do is convince them to take ownership of it. Maybe we're not far away from some of these things. I'm entirely hands up saying maybe there's people who've done it better. Maybe there's people who actually have that secret sauce to get it to work. I'm just healthily skeptical of anything which is suddenly a hype and suddenly everyone takes over and everyone does it, until you see it working, until you see the technology foundation behind it to go, oh, yeah, that works. I'll buy into that. I'm going to be skeptical. And that is the end of my rant. And I've got some more rants up my sleeve. So I'll catch you next time. Cheers.